I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Lara.
And this is the Once Upon a Niger podcast.
Welcome.
Welcome.
This is episode 4.
Episode 4, yes.
Yeah, and we are still talking about the legacy of Abacha and the people who were impacted. Or
Yes.
significant figures who were connected to Abacha's regime.
Yes. So last episode we spoke about Ken Saro-Wiwa. And this episode we shall be speaking about
MKO Abiola, also known as Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, Chief Moshood Kashimawo. Very interesting name. Do you know what his middle name means?
it leaves me I feel it's from the fact that he was one of many children, but his other siblings had not survived.
Yeah.
And I think his name meant that.
Let's wait and see.
Yes.
And he actually got the Moshood name when he was 15 years old. So imagine living for 14 years of your life with a name that says let's wait and see.
I don't I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
that's the report anyway, that the Moshood came much later in his life. Yeah. But yeah, so that is the figure we're talking about today, the well-known Nigerian philanthropist, businessman, political figure.
Mm-hmm. A man of hope.
A man of hope in Nigeria's democracy. Let's talk about him.
Yeah. So MKO Abiola was a man that was well connected in the Nigeria, amongst the Nigerian political elite and business elite. He was well educated. He had his own businesses. He travelled abroad and studied abroad. And
Glasgow.
Yes, and went back to Nigeria to work. So this was a man that was a well-established
a very well-established
figure.
businessman. I think to important to note, he had a airline. He had an airline. He had a printing press. He had I believe he was into food as well. He was really well connected. So he had a radio station. Concord Airline was his airline. He even had a bank.
He was just into everything.
Habib Bank, Summit Oil International Limited, Concord Press of Nigeria, African Ocean Lines. So he was in the communications, oil and publishing industry. And his fortune was estimated at $2 billion.
In today's figure.
Yeah.
Today's money.
Or maybe even at the money then, I'm not sure, but I think
anyway, $2 billion is
$2 billion is a lot of money.
It's big. That's big money. Whether it was now or 20 years ago.
Just being someone who was so rich and well connected and everything. So for his philanthropy, he was known for just funding, sponsoring, and the thing with Nigeria is that also when you're rich and all that stuff, people want you to be the chairman of this, the chairman of that, sponsor this, sponsor that. So he had a lot of titles and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think perhaps the most important title that he had was the chieftaincy title of Are Ona Kakanfo of the Yoruba land, which is he's meant to be. It's a kind of a military, not military. When you're the ruler, the war ruler of your tribesmen, you're acknowledged.
You're the top
warrior. Top warrior kind of thing. So that's a hefty title.
Yeah.
And MKO, for the rich man that he was and everything. Again, you know about this in Nigeria, or even in Africa, but particularly in Nigeria, they start to put your name in songs. And there's a very popular one which we're going to insert into this pod. King Sunny Ade had him in songs, so he was he was a vibe man. He was really, yeah.
So we'll play the clip now.
jẹ́ n ṣoríire. Èdùmàrè jẹ́ n ṣoríire. Bíi ti MKO Abiola. Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò gbogbo Yorùbá. Ò bá fọwọ́ ọlá ẹ̀ kàn mí lára kí n dolówó.
Yeah, so, and then I guess for as many business people, most times I'm thinking of Donald Trump going into politics. When I was looking
What
into,
comparison? Wow.
I know, in terms of being a businessman, but I don't think Donald Trump was as successful a businessman, well, with some of the things we're hearing about, you know, his companies and stuff like that. I don't know, but yeah, he had political aspirations as well, and I think that's generally a common thing for quite a lot of business people, sometimes going into politics to solidify their influence, just getting all angles. So he went into politics, and he was actually he was very outspoken about reparation and recompense from US and European countries for the enslavement of African people who profited from Africa's like material resources, raw materials, and they did all of that to the detriment of Africans.
Yeah.
So, but then also, well, we'll come into this later. But yeah, he was very, you know, he was very prominent, and then obviously at this time the military government. The military rulers were in place in Nigeria, and I think it got to a point where they started to kind of prefer the opportunity for democracy, and they said, well, we're gonna hand over to a civilian government, and this then became the time when Abiola, you know, started to campaign, and he was put forward as the candidate for his party, which was the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. Because I think the two parties at the time was the National Republican Convention. I'm not sure if that party is still in existence, but or maybe it's morphed into a different party now.
As they do,
exactly. And so yeah, he was the presidential candidate of the SDP party for the June 12, 1993 presidential elections.
And June 12th is an important day for Nigeria.
Day. Why is it an important day?
Well, that day has been marked as Nigeria's Democracy Day. I believe that's the title. So on the 12th of June, 1994. 93. An election took place where Abiola had been campaigning, and this election was viewed globally as, in this election, MKO Abiola was recognized as the rightful president-elect in that campaign.
Yeah, definitely. Because what had happened was the results, you know, when you vote and then the results starts to rolling and they're counting and, you know, figuring out who's won, who's leading and all that stuff. As the results were rolling across the different states in Nigeria, it became apparent very quickly that MKO had won 58.4% of the vote.
Which is massive.
That is massive.
It's huge.
He got a majority in 20 out of 30 states, plus the federal capital of Nigeria, which is Abuja.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah, so, you know, at this time, it hadn't been officially declared that he was the winner, but from the results that was already became already very obvious that he was the winner, and that was the kind of celebration that already started in line with the results and whatnot, and it was, you know, till today, that election is always been declared as the freest, the fairest, and the most peaceful election in the history of Nigeria, right? But then something happened something, there was a rude awakening somewhere in the midst of all the celebration and the hope that was starting to kind of emerge in light of, you know, this election. Because the military regime, the military rulers had said, okay, we're going to hand over power to civilian, you know, to civilian rule. There's going to be a democracy. There's going to be an election, and election are taking place. But very quickly, they overturned this decision, and they said, actually, we're going to put a pause on this.
Pause.
We're going to put a pause, and then the moment you start hearing, oh, we're going to put a pause, you start to question, you know, this is not what we had agreed, kind of thing. And I think very quickly things started to go south, basically. So the struggle became trying to uphold the results of that election,
the veracity of it,
and trying to just uphold the people's, not just the results for results' sake, but this is the people's decision. Yeah. This is the first time
they're mandated by the people.
And they've made their decision, they've made their choice very clear. And I think there's something to be said for MKO's campaign as well. What he was campaigning, his manifesto at the time. You know, it was one that was fueled by so much hope. I think it was actually called Hope 93. And there was so much during the military regime and stuff. There was poverty. There was, you know, education was poor. Medical access to medical care was very bad. The roads were bad, and it's pretty much like, I feel like what's happening today in Nigeria, basically. Maybe even till I wasn't born then, I don't know, but I was born then. I guess the whole military regime, you know, I was born at a specific time towards the end of it. But yeah, things were really bad. And Abiola came in as this kind of like figure of light for the people.
I love that phrasing. Figure of light. Yeah.
Yeah, he came in as this person who was going to change stuff, and it's reflected even in the kind of like way he was able to unite people, because you would know that for you to get that level of unity, things must have gotten so bad.
Yeah.
That people are like...
Yeah, quite desperate. People must have been in a very like desperate situation. And as we said before, he was an industrious man. And clearly respected, and people like he was viewed as somebody that could be trusted. And we see that that language of hope being used in some of our more recent campaigns of really significant political leaders, aka Obama. You know, campaign of hope. It's just Abiola is like, well, Obama is reminiscent of Abiola's campaign. But the fact you used the phrase figure of light, but I mean, we know that there's, you know, there are different shades to people. And even though he we believe, and it is acknowledged today, that he was the rightful winner of that election, his journey was not without suspicion.
Yes. What were the suspicions?
Well, the suspicions were, I suppose, and that will always be, you always have suspicions attributed to wealthy people. He was, during his time of building his wealth and his businesses, you know, it was during the time of military regime, and he was chummy. And comfortable with people who were in successive military regimes, and that's bound. You're bound to like have questions as to why you who presents yourself as this figure of light, as this beacon of hope, as a trusted figure in the community. Why are you comfortable, you know, associating yourself with people that have done Nigeria harm?
And you're right, and I think that casted a shadow over his whole like just over his person, and even just like also like claims of like maybe on just like suspicious practices in business as well and things like that. So there's so many shades to people. There's never really like a one. What's that word that Chimamanda said?
Single story.
There's never a single story to a person. But then whatever negativity you might have, whatever like negative things you might have done, does not cancel out the two facts can remain the same. You can be like, yeah, you did this, but then you also did XYZ as well.
Yeah.
And so not to like justify anything he did or whatnot, but I think just in light of the achievement of democracy and the significance of democracy, I think that has really kind of like brought him to the forefront and really propelled him as a great figure in Nigeria's history. And with the whole annulment as well, people were saying there was a lot of like tribal motivation for why he couldn't be. He couldn't, because I believe he was running against an Hausa man.
Yes.
Right? And the military is really full of Hausa people from the north. The military regime in Nigeria is like, a lot of them are just like from the north and all that stuff, and they have a monopoly of power. And so now having a Yoruba man and a democracy is almost like it was posing a threat to the power that the military have had for a while in the tribe. So that's like one of the, and I guess till today in Nigeria there's always a tribal element to a lot of things that are happening. But that was that. But then the thing is, he won election across different states, so it wasn't like just the Yoruba across the northern part, across the eastern part, and all that stuff. So
and that's what was so powerful.
Definitely.
That's I think key to like his power and his attractiveness as a presidential candidate.
Yeah.
It's the fact that he was able to appeal to so many people across the country.
Yeah.
And I suppose maybe that even might put a question mark on how important like tribal divisions are in Nigerian politics. Like it's very clear that it does play a part. It's obviously very clear that there's a north-south divide, but I think there's an interesting point of conversation around the fact that this man was able to appeal to the humanity of all sorts of different peoples, and actually the things that we all care about beyond our tribal loyalties is that we need food, water, shelter, education, security, and maybe these tribal differences are they're played upon and stoked upon by those who aren't interested in the unity.
Yeah, totally. And I think
Nigeria.
we referred to that in our first episode of even this whole thing of like, the president must come from now everyone is waiting for that Igbo president that is going to come and to even the equation and all that stuff.
Which is
and
not a way
it's not a way to go.
It's not a way to run a country.
Nigeria, we need to find the best candidate for all of this. And actually, like you rightly said, one comment from one of the professors around the time in the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, he was saying that Abiola was able to, he allowed everyone to rise above ethnic and religious differences, and that was the first time a Yoruba man and a Yoruba person that's been able to win votes both in the east and the north. So it was such a very significant thing that happened. Yeah. And so the election was annulled, and again, international communities were obviously, raising their eyebrows. America, UK, they acknowledged this as a violation of democratic standards, and so they restricted aid to Nigeria. So that was how bad that kind of got, and there was just a tussle of power back and forth.
Sorry, I really have a issue, I guess, with that in terms of, you know, I'm not sure how, this is probably going off on a tangent a little bit, but how functional or it is to, you know, like restrict aid, you know, to people that clearly need it. Because that's a tool that was floated around when the NSARS protests were going on. Many people that actually know, people wanted there to be sanctions placed upon Nigeria because of the brutality and killings that were going on. And on social media and people on the ground are like, no, like there shouldn't be sanctions or restrictions on aid or things coming to Nigeria, because that's what harms the people. And sorry, I think I've gone off on a tangent
that's just those countries flexing they're flexing their muscle, their power. You know, they've got the power, they can do it. Again, obviously there's questions as to even how they came to be in the position to be giving us aid in the first place and the whole connection, but that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, you're right, it's questionable, but that happened. And yeah, there was that tussle back and forth. And also it was just like, at this time there was also questions of like, you know, because you would expect that, you know, MKO would garner a lot of support and there would be people fighting and, you know, trying to get him back to this rightful position of his and whatnot. But there were also like traditional rulers who were receiving bribes for their silences, and, you know, so there's the same thing with like Ken Saro-Wiwa's situation. You have the chiefs and people who are opposing this noble cause. You're always going to have people opposing the noble cause. But yeah, some people just didn't think he was the rightful person. And yeah, they got paid for, you know, they got paid for their silence. And that was what happened. But anyway, a month into this whole tussle of power and whatnot, then they had to agree for an interim government to be put in place until such a time when they will be able to plan and make announcements for a new election. And then the interim government, this man called Chief Ernest Shonekong. Now, I don't really know much about him, and it seemed like he wasn't even there for that long. But Ernest Shonekong was put in place to kind of be there for the interim government. I don't know, maybe it was meant to be like an interim president or something. But yeah, we're both still, I'm still learning about this stuff myself. But it was just a lot of political gamble that was going on. That's just the way I can put it. There was a lot of political gamble, but MKO was still not having any of this at this point. And, you know, he was expressing his discontent with the whole thing. But funny enough, Ernest Shonekong was only in interim leadership for 3 months. So he had barely just even gotten comfortable with the seats and whatnot. And then he resigned very suddenly, apparently. He resigned, and the question till today is what motivated his resignation.
Always these mysterious deaths, mysterious resignations with around this time.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can all be almost certain that it's not it's not that mysterious, actually.
No. I guess just, you know, I don't know, maybe there's been articles written about this as to what exactly was the motivation for this, but I can only assume that Abacha had something to do with it, because there was a coup.
Abacha, the bogeyman.
Abacha just, you know, came back, and there was a military coup. Abacha hijacked power, and he declared himself the head of state in November 1993. So think about it. The June 12th election, June, July, August, September, October, November. So just 5 months into this whole thing, he came into power. He declared himself the military head of state. And yeah, after this self-appointment, he just like literally dissolved all the arms of state, that were created during the transitioning period. He empowered the military administrators to replace civilian governors in the state. So people were losing their jobs, and like the military were just taking over, and that was what was happening. So all of this was happening like simultaneously. So you're fighting for your democracy, a military government is coming into place and dissolving all arms of government, taking over civilian governors' operations in their states, and
there's just so much turmoil.
And literally very gradually that democracy was kind of like just slipping away. What do you think? How do you think MKO should have responded to all of this? Like, obviously he was trying for so long to retain and to try to get them to restate the result of that election. But then Abacha came into power, took over, and all that stuff. What do you think should have been MKO's position?
I think his position should have been, well, to respect the vote and the will of the people.
So what, you should have just continued fighting for it?
Well, what else can...
So like Abacha comes into government and says, I'm taking over another military coup and military regime, and you're still kind of like fighting for power. Do you think he should have just like let it go and maybe like somewhere in the background be strategically plotting for the next time, or how to unseat Abacha?
I mean, it's difficult to... I find it difficult to say. I mean, I think that you want to... It's difficult to move past... I'm just speaking from like my own perspective. It's difficult to move past the fact that the people have voted for me, and that has not been respected and acknowledged. So you want to continue that should still be maintained, right? But at the same time, there's also this turmoil going on with this new leader that needs to be addressed. So I find it, honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I guess there's no like, it's not a trick question. There's no clear, because you think, I guess it's just an individual choice. Because some people might say, well, retract to, what's that word? You go back to live to fight another day kind of thing, or do you just like keep fighting and keep banging your head against the wall until you kind of like get through? And I guess MKO decided to kind of just keep knocking until the door was open, kind of situation. But that got him into trouble. That got him into more trouble because Abacha wasn't having any of it. And despite the political armed robbery that was happening, MKO kept fighting, and he gave a speech on. He gave a speech in 1994 called "Enough is Enough."
Yes.
And that really kind of showed his political will. And I guess to an extent, I question whether, given the fact that he was bringing so much hope, and there was this kind of like, he's going to be the beacon of light to rescue the situation, and I'm not trying to put too much kind of whatever on him and thinking it was going to be the solution for Nigeria's problem, but there was really a lot of hope that he was going, because he had, like in his manifesto, he was saying things like, we're going to get the best Nigerians to solve Nigeria's problem, we're going to get rid of the brain drain, and
pull on the diaspora,
pull on the diaspora, and just kind of, we're starting to do so, like, buy Nigeria to rescue Nigeria, to
buy Nigerians, for Nigerians.
For Nigeria and all this stuff. Like, he really had that kind of energy. And so it was just, for me, like, I can see why he kept pursuing that. And I guess it was also just to give the people hope as well, because I guess if he retracted, then it would have just been like there's nothing to fight for, and we're just gonna wait for another. And they did wait for another 5 years of military regime before, from 1993 to 1998, when Abacha just mysteriously passed away. But yeah, that speech, enough is enough. He was saying that, you know, if power was handed over to him, he was not trying to witch hunt or retaliate. His objective was just to enforce the will of the people, as expressed in the election. But yeah, what did Abacha do? So MKO was fighting and was saying in this speech, like, enough is enough. If you give up power, I'm not trying to witch hunt, you're not going to go to jail or anything like that. I just want you to...
Showed grace. Because his primary thing was like, you know, he just wants peace and democracy.
Yeah.
Right? Which is such a respectable thing, you know, from this leader who's had an election. Well, he doesn't even believe it's stolen from him. He believes the election is stolen from the people.
Yeah.
Right? So his concern is we need to honour what the people
have done. But this was an effrontery, like, it was just like, how dare you kind of situation, and it became a treasonable offence.
Acts of treason.
An act of treason, that is it. Yeah, a treasonable felony, yeah. And so the hunt for MKO began, basically, after that speech that he gave, where he kind of just tried to I think it was seen as like he tried to self-appoint himself as president, because I think he declared himself president or something.
Well, there were talks of you know, him doing that by going into like Nigerian waters and being on a boat or a ship or something and making that declaration. I was like, what? And when I was researching that, I was like, I'm here for that energy.
Yeah.
claim what
to the people.
Yeah, like go ahead, go and do that. But that he decided not to do that.
But then I feel like what he did was even worse. Well, not worse, but it was no better, because he basically just went for it full force, and Abacha was like, I'm not going to have any of this. I'm not going to have this sort of like rudeness, as it were, in my regime. And yeah, the military were on the hunt for MKO, and within 11 days they found him, they arrested him, they imprisoned him on treason charges.
So that was a message to others who wanted to come against Abacha, that Abacha is basically declaring that this is the type of regime we're going to have. You're not going to declare yourself the rightful winner of this election. You're not going to criticize my rule. You're not going to get away with that. I'm going to shut that down, you know, basically bury it.
Yeah. And it was literally a reign of terror. Like, there was terror across the country, because it was cracking down on all his oppositions. He was subduing all this union there, union here. They were all kind of like just dissipating. He took control of the press. So what was being reported was very kind of controlled. He jailed hundreds of people. Like, many people were jailed at the time of Abacha's regime. He began a series of trial, you know, against his opponents and stuff. And even like notable figures like Wole Soyinka was in exile in Paris. A few people were in exile during Abacha's time, and that was just you know, a tip of the iceberg of the kind of things that were happening. And even as a child, I have to say that I just remember just fear being a very dominant emotion amongst the adults. And I remember my granddad used to like buy, like he would buy newspaper, I would read it, and he had such excellent commentary on what's happening, and he would just say stuff, and I didn't really understand the full extent of it, but I would just remember like, oh, this person has received a letter bomb and they've died, like one of them was like Delegiwa, and I just started to feel like, what, is everyone gonna start receiving like letter bombs in there? You know, you just don't understand, like, why is this person receiving a letter bomb, and why is that happening, why is this happening? So even as a child, I remember like a residual feeling of just fear and feeling that fear amongst the adults and just this, this kind of things going on. So it was a massive, massive reign of terror. But yeah, Abacha was, MKO Abiola was in prison now on treason charges. And I feel like we should give a few minutes to his wife.
Yeah.
Kudirat Abiola. I mean, he had many wives, but Kudirat Abiola in particular, I felt like was a kindred spirit. Was a kindred spirit, and she was also an activist, and she was just like very socially conscious, a businesswoman, and you could basically say that she just picked up the baton where MKO left it, and yeah.
And it's so, and that's the thing of the women of these great political leaders, like they do such great work. And you think of other famous women in African politics. I mean, the most obvious one that comes to mind is Winnie Mandela, and
yeah.
her continued fight while Nelson was imprisoned.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, probably similar kind of spirit, kindred spirit. She took up the baton and she was just continuing the race for democracy in his absence. But again, she quickly kind of got the attention of the military, and they weren't having none of it. So she really exhibited like a quality of leadership. She garnered support. There were protests.
And that spirit has continued today as well. Like the activism of women today in the way that we are impacted, especially in the country Nigeria, the way girls and women are impacted.
Yeah.
Women do a great deal in ensuring that our voices are heard, that our struggles are heard. Anyway, women are just amazing.
Yeah. And I think it's, we're trying to get their voices heard in this, like in the retelling of the stories, and making sure that they're not just relegated to the background, or they play very significant roles in this stuff. And I think probably for the next episode, we should really look into Fela Kuti's mother, Ransom Kuti. But yeah, so Kudirat Abiola was that kind of figure as well. But anyway, she quickly became a target for the military, and before you knew it, in 1996, in June 1996, she was targeted, and she was fired at
and killed, unfortunately.
While she was in her car. She was being driven. Her driver was hit. She was hit in the forehead. By the time she got to the hospital, she was pronounced dead. Again, there were conspiracy about her special assistant and
surviving.
He survived. He was also in the car, and perhaps he might have been involved. But yeah, just to know that his wife died in the cause of this fight for democracy, because some people might go, well, maybe there's a bit of like self gratification in all of this, where you want power for yourself, but the extent to which you go to for gaining that power, surely there has to be something beyond yourself that is motivating you. And
that's what's so key, and that's what is needed for progression amongst political leaders, or amongst even the people. It's harkening onto an ideal that transcends your own individual needs. Which obviously now is very, very difficult, especially because we are of a generation where Nigeria is a very young country, and the youth unfortunately have not known. They have not seen for themselves anything that's like worth harkening onto. And we hope that raising the story and awareness of these figures is a little bit of encouragement and reminder that even though things are quite dark, they've been dark before, and these people have come through. We've had that beacon of light. We've had that spark. And I'm totally aware that, you know, I'm very privileged to be in this part of the world and talking about that. But yeah, hope is a powerful thing.
Most definitely.
It's really powerful. Once people have hope and they believe that it, you know, change is possible. I mean, that's the very reason why Abacha was going around doing what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because hope in a people, once it catches like fire
spreads.
It's very difficult to put out.
Yeah. And I think that there's still sparks of that fire that is still going on till today, because we have to acknowledge that something happened around that time that kind of changed. It shifted. There was a shift around that time that is still lingering on to today. And I think even despite the fact that he didn't win the election and he had a tragic end, so we'll just bring in, you know, wrapping up the story and the narrative of what happened, because there's always an ending for everything. You just think of all these like dictators and all these people that in the world we've known of. There's always an end to them, whether they come to a natural death or, you know, something happens and they die. And that was what happened in 1998, because despite Abacha's kind of like promise of eventually handing back power back, it never really happened. It wasn't something that he actively worked towards that we know of, but then he died. He tragically died, and I think we talked about that in episode 2 of his death, and even the conspiracies and things like that. So that was a tragic death that happened in June. And obviously following his death, there was now sort of like the clamour for, okay, let's let things go back, and people were making efforts. So like Abdusalami Abubakar succeeded Abacha as the military president of Nigeria, commander-in-chief, and then he started to establish like a multi-party election, and then he said, well, we're ready for civilian rule and all of that stuff. And then alongside that is now trying to release people from prison, so all these like prisoners, political prisoners. So MKO Abiola was like, okay, he's gonna come out of prison, and yeah, he was due to be released from prison. He was due to be released from prison in July 1998, and then I mean, I think about it and I'm thinking, okay, they say that so MKO was meant to be released from prison. He was meeting with like representatives of the US government and Nigerian officials on the day that he died. And I think the purpose of the meeting was to like discuss the terms of his release and, you know, and all that stuff. But everything like literally took a rapid turn of events, because they said, he had barely gotten into the room. You know, they serve you tea and all that stuff. Apparently, he hadn't even drank from the tea.
Oh, I thought he had drank.
Yeah, so the report from the US representative, so there's mixed reports, and that's why you never really know who to believe, and that's why there's this strong conspiracy that he was murdered, because it doesn't make sense. He has a heart, he had an enlarged heart, and then the time for him to die and for all of that to kind of like
it's way too convenient.
It was way too convenient. It was way too coincidental as well. But you know, they said the report was that he had actually sipped the cup of tea.
Okay.
But then I actually heard another report that said that he hadn't actually sipped the cup of tea. So it's a question of who do you believe? But the general report is that he had sipped the cup of tea. So that's what I decided to go with.
Well, I mean, it's not even necessarily at that moment in time. It could have he could have
prior.
There could have been a slow poisoning.
Yeah. But they said the autopsy was done, and so this is the thing, is because MKO Abiola was a Muslim as well, same as Abacha. Obviously, there was no autopsy carried out for Abacha because, you know, according to the Muslim right, he died. They obviously before the sunset, whatever, they bury you. But with MKO, they really made sure that they carried out an autopsy, because they were trying to like dispel any conspiracy about him being killed and all that stuff. And they said they didn't find any trace of poison in his system. But I mean, even people like Wole Soyinka were like, yeah, he was killed. Many critics of the government and stuff believe the man was killed. but they say he became very ill very quickly. He was wheezing,
No,
he was
I
coughing,
don't buy
and
that.
then he collapsed, and then before they rushed him to the presidential clinic, he had died by noontime. I'm like,
Yeah, I don't buy it.
I don't buy it. I just think it's way too coincidental and way too convenient. Because this man has been in prison for 5 years.
No.
1993 to 1998.
Yeah. And it's now.
And it's now on the day you're discussing terms of his release. I mean, it would make for a very interesting movie.
I know, you always wait for the...
I'm always waiting for the movie. I'd really like to get into, if there's any producer out there who is interested in collaborating with us, yes, we are very much ready for this. But yeah, so that was, you can imagine the shocking news, because it was literally like a month after Abacha dying, and yeah, it was it was shocking, both like internationally and locally as well, and it really attracted a lot of like public interest. A lot of people were shocked, people were sad, and yeah, it was just that they were so close to experiencing true democracy. And a lot of the question was who killed him or what killed him, but mostly who killed him. Yeah. So the autopsy said he died of natural causes, but Nigerians have maintained their suspicions about the questionable circumstances.
Does anybody ever die of natural causes when you're in those circles?
Yeah. And the question is, if MKO, assuming he had been poisoned and killed, the question was who was going to benefit from his death. My kind of, the fact that he refused to relinquish power, and the question is, if he had come out of prison after all these years, would he have then wanted to continue? Because he had given so much for that cause. So I don't imagine, because they were trying to discuss the terms of his release, what to say, come out of prison and just go back to your village somewhere. He's gonna come back out, and he's gonna want
with even more vim.
Bigger, do you know what I mean? So there was just too much at stake, and I guess given Abacha's death, some people wanted a clean slate or some form of clean slate to begin with, and that's kind of like the conspiracy, and it's a very plausible one in my opinion. And yeah, so that was how Abacha died. I mean, Abacha died and MKO died. But following that, Obasanjo was then made president, and this was meant to be acknowledged as some sort of consolatory what do you call it, symbol, this Yoruba man that was meant to...
it's a, I don't want to say token, but
that's the word.
Token, maybe it is the word, tokenistic concession that you've not been MKO has not been able to embody or take on the position that so many people wanted him to.
And again, they gave it to Obasanjo, and there's this whole tribe thing coming into play again, because Yoruba man Obasanjo, Yoruba man MKO, they were both from the same state. There was meant to be some known connection between them and all that stuff. So that was meant to appease the people, the Yoruba people. And I guess, would I say he served the purpose? Because Obasanjo was president for 8 years. And since then, we've had a successive civilian, democratic rule, and there's been relative stability. Questionable.
Quite questionable. I mean, I definitely think the reality is that the impact is that we do have civilian civilian rule, and so in all the things that are tragic with Nigeria, that is a good thing. So I think we just need to recognize, we should be able to recognize the good in things, and so that is good that that happened. I suppose what we need to work towards is moving beyond the chokehold of tribalism, having such a strong influence over Nigerian politics.
Yeah. And ultimately, for such a significant moment in Nigeria, I think it's ridiculous that it took so long for it to be acknowledged as a national.
Yeah.
A
national holiday. Yeah.
June 12th as a democracy day, and
and by of all presidents, President Buhari.
Yeah.
I think that there's a quote from Buhari when Democracy Day was instituted. He said that we cannot rewind the past, but we can at least assuage our feelings, recognize that a wrong has been committed, and resolve to stand firm now and ease the future for the sanctity of free elections. Nigerians will no longer tolerate such perversion of justice. This retrospective and posthumous recognition is only a symbolic token of redress and recompense for the grievous injury done to the peace and unity of our country.
And that is significant. That is such a significant acknowledgement because, 20-something years after all of this happened, that was when the public apology happened. And MKO was conferred with the title the Grand Commander of the Federal Republic. So that is the GCFR Awards. And I believe it's an award that is reserved only for former presidents. So that
which is really powerful.
It's powerful, Yeah. It's really powerful, and I think that apology, it was late, but better late than never. And I think, again, like we were saying, and this is part of what we're trying to achieve with this podcast, of just trying to bring our history to light and give it its rightful place, its rightful position, and acknowledge these people and just create more avenue for people to engage, because these things have an impact. They've had an impact. They continue to have an impact on how our democracy is being formed. And we must never take it for granted.
No.
People died for this democracy. Not just MKO Abiola, many other people whose names you will never hear, whose names have kind of been drowned by the other bigger names. But these people, significant people, ordinary civilians died for this democracy. And I hope we will never have to experience a military rule again. I mean, our democracy is so young, but hopefully and fragile. But yes, on that note,
you've heard us speak about MKO Abiola, his impact and legacy on Nigerian politics and ushering and being really basically a fire starter and sparking the ushering in of democracy into Nigeria. So we honour him.
Indeed. And so please do listen, share with your families and friends. Do follow us on our social media platform, mostly Instagram, YouTube, Facebook as well. But you can listen to the pod on Spotify, Google Pod, and anywhere you get your podcast, really. And engage with us as well. We want to hear from you. What do you want us to talk about? What questions do you have? What contributions do you have? Speak to us. We want to hear from you.
Yes, so you can find our contact information in the show notes. Find us on Instagram at Once Upon a Niger, and you'll be listening to us on the next episode.
So, until then,
peace.
Deuces.